Hello and welcome to this presentation. Today we'll be discussing drag queen story hour. But before we get into that, we need to understand what a drag queen is. So a drag queen is typically a male dressed as a female or posing as a female, whether that be for an explicitly sexual reason or an expression of his gender identity. It's up to the person. Um, there are the opposite, a female as a male, but it's pretty much a rarity. Um, so let's get into the nitty gritty of Drag Queen Story Hour and some of the controversies surrounding it. So, what is Drag Queen Story Hour? Well, it's a educational program that is in libraries and schools, primarily in the United States, but it's also been accepted in the United Kingdom and some parts of Europe. Basically, it's an educational program where drag queens will come to the school and give a presentation, whether that be reading a book or teaching a lesson, about a scientific topic or an English topic or mathematics, something of that nature. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Um, it could be very helpful for somebody that's um, maybe confused about their gender. Seeing somebody that's representing themselves, might help them open up and learn this topic more. Um, However, there's some controversy behind that. We'll get into that in the next slide. So the controversy is drag queens in and of themselves are uh, very sexual in nature. Not necessarily just the drag queen themselves, but the persona of a drag queen is a sexualized version of a female. It's usually you see a drag queen with giant breasts or extremely um, sexualized makeup. The wigs are typically designed to make you look um, as sexual as possible. Usually it's skimpy clothing. This would be okay in a burlesque type of setting, like in a bar or um, a play or something like that. But in a school where we don't even allow our children to wear this type of clothing, no, it doesn't fly. So a lot of people have, in recent years, I mean, it started way back um, before I was even in school, to push back about drag queens. However, now that drag queen story hour has kind of invaded schools and public libraries and public spaces, the pushback has kind of gotten tremendous. Um, the pushback from the right side, which I guess I would consider myself on the right side, would be that we don't want our children, because I'm a father myself, we don't want our children to be exposed to something this sexually explicit at a young age. Um, there's a time and place for everything. I believe if my son was 15 or 16 years old and he wanted to go to a drag show, I'd take him there. I personally don't really agree with drag show, but if my son wanted to go, I'd take him. Um, but below the age of 15, 16, off limits. Because a child at that age, their mind is still developing. They still haven't understood. Most of them don't even understand what sex is, um, or sexuality for that matter. So it's very confusing for a child at that age to see somebody like this and not understand why they're dressed like this. But there's also pushback from the other side. Uh, Many people that support drag queen story hour and drag queens in general, they might say, well, you're just being bigoted because you don't agree with their lifestyle or their sexual choice or their gender identity. And for the most part, I can understand where they're coming from. If that was the way I uh, put myself out for the world, as you could say, then I would understand, having all this negativity towards me could be offensive. But like I stated earlier, you're dealing with children, and you just can't have something that explicitly sexual and children. We don't allow children to view pornography, so I don't believe that we should allow this to be in front of our children. Now, a very controversial event happened last year in the United Kingdom. There was a drag queen story hour at a local library. However, instead of having a presentation, like I stated earlier, about mathematics or reading a book or something like that, this event had uh, drag queens performing extremely sexual um, dance moves and routines in front of small children. Some of them were even babies. Now, I personally, and a lot of other people, feel that the members involved in this should have been arrested because that is essentially engaging in pornography in front of a child. I mean, that's a huge no-no. Um, I would never allow my child, my brother's children, my anybody's children to be seeing this if they're around me, because that is just strictly off limits. Um, but that has supercharged the pushback, you might say, against drag queen story hour and the gender identity type of, I guess you could say, rhetoric that's been going around. A lot of people are saying that if this is going to be okay, what are they going to do next? Are they going to be completely naked in front of a child? I mean, I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but you can see how one thing can progress to the next, can progress to the next. So it's essentially a slippery slope type of situation. If you allow this to happen and don't say anything, then maybe somebody will push it that little bit further and try to do that explicit act. Um, I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying they will, but these types of things, when it's a sexual nature, typically, if one thing is allowed to happen, the next thing will just pile on top. In conclusion, we've discussed Drag Queen Story Hour and some of the controversies behind it, and I just feel personally that there should be some sort of a separation, or I would say a block, an age block for Drag Queen Story Hour and drag queens in general to be introduced into a child's uh, life and educational um, life. I believe that a child should be at least 16 years of age before they're introduced to something of this nature, because I mean, at 16, you're still technically a child, but you are capable of understanding sexual things in a more mature way. I'm not saying a 16-year-old is mature, because I was definitely not mature at 16 years old. However, I feel that a 16-year-old could at least understand and sympathize with somebody um, of that gender identity. Um, but in saying that, I just don't believe that children should be exposed to this type of debauchery. I believe that children should be, um, they should remain innocent, and I just believe children should be children um, until they're adults, essentially. Thank you for following along this presentation, and I hope you have a great night.